excited to be able to talk today, and it's going to be read today, about the Poor Farm. It's a subject of great interest to me and has been for a very long time. The story of the Gasconade County Farm, more frequently called the Poor Farm, covers just a brief period of 45 years. To provide the setting for that story, however, today's story will begin in 1904, 5 years prior to the establishment of the Poor Farm in 1909. In 1904, Missouri's poor law could be summarized this way. The county court of each county was charged with the care of the inhabitants of the county who were entitled to relief. The law authorized the county court to erect a poorhouse, appoint a superintendent of the poorhouse, and make all rules for its management. The superintendent was given the power to cause all residents of the poorhouse to do useful work on the farm so far as they were able. Finally, the court was authorized to contract for support of the poor. In the records are 3 petitions that were filed on May 24, 1904 that requested the county court to submit to the voters at the November 8th election a proposition granting the county court the authority to purchase a county poor farm. Those petitions bore 116 names and originated in Drake and Oring precincts in Beth Township and in the Gasconade City precinct in Richland Township. While there's no indication in the minutes of the county court, now known as the county commission, that that petition was ever presented to the court, likely for lack of a required number of signatures, it is clear from the minutes that the county was at the time making regular payments to individuals for the care of the county's destitute. The amount paid out was based on the needs of the needy and the petitions of the caregivers. One can only speculate as to the identity of the caregivers. They may have been family members or friends or acquaintances of the destitute individuals. However, they may just as likely have been persons who the county court could convince to take on the responsibility of providing the care, and the financial support from the county might have been an obvious incentive to take on the task of caregiving. December 3rd, 1903, county court minutes announced that in the February term of the court, bids would be let to the lowest and best bidders for the care of 9 paupers, whose names were listed in the minutes. Then in February 1904, the court awarded bids ranging from $9 per quarter to $30 per quarter, and one for $48 for a year. In May of 1906, for example, payments of $6 to $25 for individuals were made, and one payment of $65.25 for 3 individuals was made. Other than the payment of the awards for caregiving, nothing appears in the minutes, or at least I have found nothing, until the announcement in the minutes of January 2nd, 1909, of the purchase of the Poor Farm. The local newspaper report of the purchase makes far more interesting reading than the court minutes, so I will share that with you from the January 6th issue of the Herman Advertiser-Courier. The county court has at last bought a county poor farm, and in so doing, no doubt, has public sentiment in its favor. This question has been before the people for a long time, but there were always obstacles in the way preventing a successful carrying out of the project. The 1909 newspaper account continued as follows. The county court has made a deal with Mr. Peter Danizer, by which the county became the owner of his 190-acre farm situated about 4.5 miles south of town on the Iron Road. The price paid is $7,500. The farm and buildings are in good condition. The farm is located near enough to the county seat to enable the county court to visit, inspect, and overlook its management as often as they meet or oftener. The question of providing for the county court has been a source of much trouble in the past, and the addition of a poorhouse will not simplify it by any means. A cage won't feed the bird. The economy in the matter of our county poor in the future will not be in cutting down expenses as they now are, but of preventing them from getting larger than they now are. Our people must and will trust to the good judgment of our county judges, who will see to it that the dependent upon the county are humanely treated and cared for under the new order of things, And I must say here, I'm quoting from the newspaper numerous times, but I'm not going to stop every time and say quote, unquote. I think you'll be able to tell when I'm reading from the paper. Obviously, the house had to be large enough to house from 10 to 20 residents, as well as the family of the superintendent, and that was no small order. At the time the county purchased the Danizer farm, the property consisted of a large two-story stone residence, a large stone barn, a large stone building used for housing farm machinery and a shop, and a few smaller outbuildings. On January 25th, 1909, the rules and regulations governing the county court farm was set out in detail in the minutes of the county court. And to me, I can't paraphrase these rules and regulations. I just really feel like I need to share them with you as they were written at that time. Number 1, the superintendent shall be a man able to perform manual labor, shall diligently work the farm, shall take good care of all the property, both real and personal, shall see that no waste is committed on timberland, orchard, or buildings, shall sow, plant, reap, gather, house, and take care of all the crops, fruit included, shall see that all the paupers are humanely and kindly treated, shall see that they are kept clean and as decent as the nature of their case will reasonably admit, shall see that their meals are regularly provided them, shall require of any of the paupers to perform such manual labor as their physical abilities will admit. The physician, where a question of ability arises, shall determine such ability. Number 2, the superintendent shall, in case he is unable to work at any time during his term of employment with the county, furnish a good substitute, or allow a credit to the county for the time lost. He shall give bond to the county in the sum of $2,000 for the faithful performance of his contract. Number 3, the superintendent shall receive for his services a salary of $500 per annum, payable in quarterly installments. Number 4, the county court shall for the county furnish to the said superintendent sufficient teams, plow, harrows, wagons, and other farm implements usually kept and used on a well-regulated farm. Shall furnish him with seed, the necessary number of milk cows, feed for the stock, necessary provisions for the paupers and for the superintendent's family under the age of 14 years, and such of his family over the age of 14 years who are actually employed on the farm, which said provisions he is to have cooked and provided in addition to his other labors. Number 5, the court reserves the right to inspect the management of the poor farm by themselves or agents at any time, to make such changes in the management of the institution as to them may seem fit and proper. Number 6, the superintendent of the poor farm shall not be allowed to receive any person on the poor farm as an inmate unless such person shall first have obtained an order from the county court, and in case of vacation, a permit from the county clerk, and if the patient is sick, also a permit from the county physician. Number 7, it shall be the duty of the superintendent to take special care that the male and female poor persons are kept separated on said farm, and he shall prevent cohabitation or other immoral conduct between male and female poor kept on the farm, and between the poor persons kept at the farm and other not inmates of the farm. And any poor inmate guilty of such conduct shall be immediately dismissed from the farm by the superintendent. Number 8, the poor persons kept on the poor farm are not allowed to receive visitors without the consent of the superintendent. Number 9, the poor persons, while under the care of the superintendent, are not allowed to leave the premises without the consent of the superintendent. And finally, number 10, it shall be the duty of the superintendent on taking charge of said farm to take an inventory of all personal property on said farm belonging to the county, consisting of all cooking utensils, kitchenware, beds and bedding, and all wearing apparel of the inmates, and to make a report of the same at the February term of the county court in each year. Then the county court went on to spell out the rules and regulations for the physician. In part, it said, the physician shall be a man well skilled in the science of medicine. He shall visit the poor farm once every 2 weeks, and at any other time the superintendent may think it necessary to do so. He will treat all paupers professionally and shall furnish all medicines at his own expense. By the end of February 1909, the county had a superintendent. August L. Schnitker was appointed for a term of 1 year at a salary of $500 per year. On the same day, the court accepted the bid of Dr. H.A. Well as the lowest and best bidder for the position of poor farm physician for the term of 1 year at a salary of $98 per year. Now, the county had a farm, a superintendent, and a doctor, but the farm had to be furnished. All of the typical expenses of operating a farm in a household all were a part of the county's budget and weekly and monthly bills to pay. In March of 1910, it was time for the superintendent's and physicians' contracts to be renewed or their bids for their positions accepted. From the record, it appears that Dr. Wells, the first physician, was underbid, as Dr. E.L. Hoffner was appointed physician for 1 year on his low bid of $80. That's for the whole year, $80. August Schnitker was reappointed superintendent, and his salary was raised to $650 from $500. A study of the 1910 census taken in April reveals some interesting statistics about the makeup of a poor farm family after 1 year of operation. As you know, the census lists the relationship of those in the household to the head of the household. Schnitker, then 34 years old, was shown as the head of the household and manager of the poor farm. Listed with him are his wife Rose, age 29, and 3 children, ages 7, 5, and 2. Then 12, and this is the term that was used, inmates were named. 7 females and 5 males, ranging in age from 45 to 89. One couple, ages 63 and 60, lived at the farm at that time. One widow, age 89, is listed, and 6 females, ages 44 to 55, were listed as being single. One of the women was the mother of 12, and of course those children were not at the poor farm, but she was the mother of 12, and another the mother of 5. Of the men, all were widowers, except the one married man I mentioned earlier. The language of 6 was English, 5 spoke German, and 1 spoke Bohemian. From time to time, the local newspaper carried news about residents of the poor farm, such as this one published in November of 1911. Patrick Scully, alias Irish Pat, a well-known old perambulating landmark of our county, having become entirely destitute, here lately has finally pulled up and gone at anchor at the county poor farm. Formerly, in the days of comparative affluency, Pat used to say, "I will never go to the county farm unless Simon Boger and August Begum Sr. go there." It seems, however, that in the light of subsequent experience, he has changed his mind. You might have guessed that Simon Boger and August Begum Sr. were successful businessmen in the county. Scully was indeed born in Ireland and was 74 years old when he was admitted to the farm on November 20, 1911. Most interesting, however, is the fact that already on March 10, 1912, he departed the poor farm without leave. Irish Pat apparently lived at the poor farm for less than 4 months. What, we must wonder, was the rest of Irish Pat's story. August Schnitker served as superintendent for 3 years, but did not submit a bid for the 4th year. New superintendent hopefuls submitted bids to the county court. William Sexauer, with a $500 bid, was appointed superintendent with his responsibility beginning on March 8, 1912. The local newspaper reported the appointment of Schnitker's successor and stated that he, Sexauer, was a man of good business qualifications and a practical and experienced farmer. The newspaper added this statement: "Mr. Schnitker, we are informed, has political aspirations." Schnitker did indeed run for sheriff and won election. William Sexauer was my late husband Randy Kukla's maternal grandfather. It must be remembered that the county contracted with the superintendent, but it really was a package deal, as the superintendent's wife carried out all the tasks for her suddenly enlarged family as she would for her own family. It is unfortunate, I think, that the register of admissions to the poor farm doesn't exist after 1918. Honestly, the records of the farm's operations are fairly routine, with the day-to-day operations, while the day-to-day operations were no doubt a little less routine when one considers the complexity of the poor farm's population. It is interesting to note that Superintendent Sexauer's daughter, Esther, was for a time paid a quarterly salary of $45 for her services as a maid. The weekly or monthly listings of expenses of the farm make interesting reading, though beyond those expenses and the annual contracting of the services of the superintendent and physician, little appears in the minutes of the county court. The expenses, month after month, were the fairly typical expenses of operating a substantial farm with a large family. Recall that the physician had to provide all medicines at his own expense. They were not allowed in addition to his salary. The local newspaper, however, did include some interesting highlights about goings-on at the poor farm. A rather interesting incident under Superintendent Sexauer's watch warranted front-page coverage in the Herman paper 2 weeks running in 1919, early in his tenure at the farm. First, in the July 16th issue is an article titled, "Trouble at a County Farm." B.A. Swanson was brought in from the county farm Friday by Sheriff Dietzel. He was suffering from severe wounds about the face and head received in an altercation with William Sexauer, superintendent of the county farm. According to Mr. Sexauer, Swanson had on numerous occasions grumbled about the meals the poor farm people received and sought to get the others to join in complaining. Mr. Sexauer claims that on Friday, Swanson went to town and on his return started inciting his fellow poor farm inmates to complain, and that thereupon he reprimanded Swanson, who then called him vile names and struck at him with his walking cane. Sexauer claims that even after he took Swanson's cane away, the latter came after him, whereupon he, Sexauer, struck Swanson first with the cane and then with his fist. Swanson's version of the trouble is as follows. Sexauer had on several occasions promised to take me to town with him so I could get 2 suits of underwear and 2 shirts. He later brought me 1 shirt and 1 suit of underwear. The garments were too small, and I needed another shirt and another suit of underwear, so I begged to be allowed to go to town with Mr. Sexauer. But though he often promised, he never took me along. Finally, I requested a passerby to take me along in his car, and I purchased the clothing, paying for the same out of my own money. When I returned to the farm, my bed had been removed. And when I asked Mr. Sexauer where it was, he told me that it had been taken out. For inasmuch as I went to town and did not work, the poor farm was no place for me. I told him he had told me I could go to town and that were I able to work, I would not be an object of charity. He denied telling me I could go to town and said I didn't want to work, and he came toward me shaking his fist at me. I got angry and we fought. I fought him as hard as I could, but I'm not a match for him, and got the worst of it. Sexauer came to town after the trouble and asked Sheriff Dietzel to take Swanson away from the county farm. The latter had a bad gash on the head and suffered much pain from a badly lacerated eye. Dr. August Smith dressed his wounds. Swanson grew up in Osage County, and some years ago he opened a cobbler shop at Morrison. But because of rheumatism and epileptic fits, he could not work and went to Springfield to make his home with his children. A short time thereafter, he came back to Gasponia County and was sent to the county farm about a month ago. He is 57 years old. You be the judge. The next week's issue of the newspaper carried a front-page sequel titled, "County Court Holds Special Session," in which the resolution of the incident is discussed. That article follows in part. When the court met last Friday, it took up the matter of the difficulty between Mr. Sexauer, superintendent, and Swanson. After hearing the statements of both men, the court held that Swanson is of sound mind, and further that the said P.A. Swanson has violated the rules of the poor farm, and therefore he is expelled from the poor farm. Sheriff Dietzel then wrote to Swanson's daughter at Springfield to get the address of his daughter in Nebraska, for it is to this latter daughter that Swanson desires to be sent. The county will pay Swanson's railway fare to the home of any of his children. The 1920 census of the poor farm provides the following information about the makeup of the poor farm family at that particular moment in history. William Sexauer, of course, was listed as the manager of the farm. The rest of his family is listed next. His wife Annie, then daughter Emily 20, Louisa 17, twins William and Annie 15, and Alec 9. Then followed 9 persons whose roles were listed as inmates. There were 3 females, aged 64, 85, and 66, respectively, and listed as widowed, married, and single. Then 6 males were listed, aged 46, 84, 79, 58, 54, and 67, 3 widowed, 1 married, and 2 single. The mother tongue of all was shown as German. 3 could not read or write. Remember Mr. Swanson? Mr. Swanson, who was involved in the altercation at the poor farm, was the 58-year-old listed in the census. So either his family didn't accept him, and he returned to the poor farm, or there's more to the story that we don't know. It was the responsibility of the county's grand jury to at least annually inspect the physical property of the county and to report to the county court. So, of course, the courthouse and the poor farm were annually reported on, and recommendations were made for needed improvements. In the minutes of the January 1, 1927 session of the county court, as reported in the Herman paper, this account is found. Without having given notice of our intended visit to the county farm, the grand jurors went to said county farm in a body and were impressed with the cleanliness of the place, the wonderful management, the good husbandry, the orderliness and comfortable and contented atmosphere and general cheerfulness of the place. And in this connection, we desire to say that we are certain that no farmer takes better care of his own farm, implements, buildings, and livestock than does Superintendent William Sexauer of the county's institution, the county farm. The inmates of the county farm are happy, contented, and cared for as well, and even better than they could be cared for by their own near and dear. It is with sincere regret, however, that we learn that Mr. Sexauer has resigned the superintendency, and we urge the county court to again renew its efforts to have Mr. Sexauer reconsidered, and that if a substantial increase in salary be any inducement for a reconsideration, the court make such offer, and that it may rest assured that such action will meet with the full approval of the taxpayers. Apparently, Sexauer had made his decision to move on after 15 years as superintendent, and held firm on it, as the March 11, 1927 newspaper reported that Sexauer and his family had moved to Herman. And on the same day, March 8th, Julius Buchholz, the new superintendent, and his family moved to the farm. Buchholz was a farmer at Bay and came to the poor farm at a beginning salary of $60 per month, plus other privileges, as noted in the records. Buchholz served as superintendent only 2 years. As in February 1929, the county court opened bids for the position as manager of the county farm from March 8, 29 to March 8, 30. The only bidders were John Dismuke at $75 and Everett Cookta at $60 per month. The low bidder was accepted for the next year. The low bidder was Randy's father, so at this point I'm going to rely largely on Randy's written reminiscences of life at the poor farm, rather than on the public records. At the time that Everett Cookta won the bid to manage the poor farm, he was 28 years old, as was his wife Marie. The couple had 2 children, 2 boys, the oldest just a month shy of 3 years, and Randy, who was 9 months old. Bear that in mind as I share his recollections. Randy was not yet a year old when his family moved to the poor farm in 1929, and his father continued as superintendent until 1949. So for Randy, his older brother, and then his younger brother, born at the poor farm just 9 months after the family moved there, the poor farm was home for all of their formative years. As a frame of reference for this period at the farm, the 1930 census listed Everett and Marie Cookta, both 29. There are 3 boys, 3 years and 11 months, 1 year and 10 months, and 3 months. One female servant, age 22, is listed, and then 8 inmates, 3 females and 5 males. One of those females, Selma Triplett, was only 29 years old. While living at the poor farm, Selma gave birth to a little girl. Now back to Randy's memories of growing up at the poor farm. He wrote, "Growing up with my 3 brothers on the poor farm was probably one of the happiest and carefree times of my life. Before the boys were old enough to help with the field work, they played around the farm, in the big yard, in the huge stone barn, large stone carriage house, along the creek which ran through the farm several hundred yards from the house, and especially the woods. The family lived in an apartment in the big square stone residence, the only building that remains today. However, as the boys grew up, they became involved in the operation of the farm. Randy wrote that living at the farm, through experience in caring for the residents, taught me about life and death, suffering from illness, ravages of disease, fear and humiliation of being destitute, loneliness and helplessness, and helped mold many of my attitudes for and about life. Further, he noted that the poor farm was not only a home, but also a school. Not a school in the traditional sense, of course. Randy's remembrances about living at the poor farm were written nearly 50 years after his parents moved away from the farm, and some as late as a few months before his death in 2006. These are largely his words, not mine, with the exception of minor editing. From 1909 until the mid-1930s, the farmhouse had no running water. Water had to be carried from a cistern in the yard. Saturday was bath day, and all the bath water had to be heated in large iron kettles outdoors over an open fire, winter and summer, and then carried into the house. All laundry water had to be heated and carried in the same manner. Laundry was first done by hand on washboards, later by hand-operated washing machines, and in the late 1930s by an electric washing machine. The superintendent had to give the men baths, and his wife had to see to the women's baths. He also did all the barbering, giving shaves and haircuts to the men. A deep well was dug in the mid-1930s and running water and bathrooms were installed. REA electricity was installed in the late 1930s, making the work much easier. Prior to the REA, a 32-volt light system had been installed with a generator run by a gasoline engine, which did provide some electric light in the house. This was known, as some of you I'm sure know, as a Delco system, and included a gasoline engine which ran a generator and a bank of 14 large batteries where electric energy was stored. This system basically provided electricity for lights and a radio. Whenever the stored energy in the batteries got low, Dad would have to start up the gas engine located in the cellar and charge up the batteries. This usually took a few hours. I did have one unhappy experience with the Delco system. Once when I was about 6, I went to the basement with Dad to start the engine. And while he was busy, I somehow crossed or shorted out the whole system. I was standing barefooted on the wet cellar floor and got a good shock which caused my hair to stand up straight on my head. And for years I had some hair on the top back of my head which would not lay flat no matter what I did to it. This caused me a lot of embarrassment as my friends knew what happened and were teasing about it. Food was produced on the farm in the form of garden produce, fruit from an orchard, milk from a small dairy herd, beef from steers raised on the farm, pork from a hog operation, chicken and eggs from a large flock of hens. In summer, the garden at the poor farm was a rather large enterprise because we grew and harvested most of the fruit and vegetables for use during the summer and for canning for the winter. We had some help from the residents, but especially from one man who sort of adopted the garden and yard as his domain. And once planted, he grew rather resentful if we messed around in it, except for the harvesting. All meat, except that used immediately after butchering, had to be cured and sausages made. Often 12 or more hogs would be butchered at a time with help from a host of neighbors. Sausage making often took several days. The very large smokehouse was filled to the brim when spring came because the meat and sausage would have to last until the next winter. Beef was usually preserved by canning. We did not do a great deal of beef butchering until the early 1940s when frozen food lockers came into use and the beef could be more easily preserved. At the poor farm, most beef would be purchased fresh and used. Milk, cream, cheese, and butter were produced and kept cool by hanging buckets containing these products in the cold water of a dug well by the use of ropes and pulleys. About 1933, we acquired an ice box that would hold a 50-pound piece of ice. This would be used during the summer months only. We usually hauled the ice from the ice house in town to the farm. About 1935, we bought a kerosene refrigerator. What a marvelous appliance. It burned kerosene and the heat from a single burner was converted into a refrigerant. This was an excellent piece of equipment and not only kept food cold, but also made ice cubes, which were a real luxury and novelty at that time. After REA electricity came to the farm in about 1939 to 40, a new electric refrigerator was obtained. The kerosene refrigerator was traded in and was really missed, even though the tank had to be filled with 5 gallons of kerosene every so many days. It made no noise or sound whatsoever. The superintendent's wife had a full-time job. From 1929 to 49, my mother had to cook 3 meals a day, 7 days a week for all residents and her own family. It's usually total from 15 to 25 persons every day. She canned several thousand quarts of fruit and vegetables and hundreds of jars of jelly and preserves. The superintendent's wife had to see that the laundry was done, clothes mended and ironed, the large house cleaned, and the yard kept. She also had to bake bread, coffee cake, pie, and cake, baking from 15 to 20 loaves of bread every other day. She was also a wife and mother and had to provide for her family. And I must say that family was very involved in church and 4-H activities and so on. Randy continues, when the population of the home was near capacity or when she was ill, extra help would be provided to help with some of the work. The superintendent had to supervise the entire operation. He had to cut all the wood for heating and cooking. The county did later purchase some coal in addition to the wood. He was responsible for the planting, cultivating, and harvesting of all field crops, garden produce, and orchard produce, raising chickens and beef cattle, and taking care of the horses and mules. My father had purchased a Fordson tractor several years before becoming superintendent and furnished this tractor free without charge to the county for all 20 years. The tractor was used primarily for heavy field work and teams of horses and mules for other work. A really dangerous event that could occur every summer on every farm was running over a bumblebee or a yellow jacket nest in the ground when mowing, raking, or hauling hay. When any bees or yellow jackets attacked the team, they had a tendency to run away from all control, and many a farmer was seriously hurt and sometimes killed as a result. I remember a few anxious moments in the field when this occurred. One such incident occurred and appeared to be humorous, but at the same time could have been serious, and really was in a way. This was once when one of the poor farm men residents was helping with hauling wood from the timberland late one day when we uncovered a yellow jacket nest. He foolishly thought he could contain them by putting his foot over the hole in the ground. But in the process, he got a number of jackets up his overall pants leg, causing him to go running, jumping, and yelling through the woods. What a sight! We all learned a valuable lesson that day, which was never to never to step on a bumblebee or a yellow jacket nest hole in the ground. Here end Randy's reminiscences. As you can imagine, with the diversified composition of the poor farm family, life there was rare and dull, even apart from bumblebees and yellow jackets. In July of 1938, the newspaper reported on Gasconade County sanity hearings. Among the items in that report is this one. August Stem of Rosebud, 65, an inmate of the county farm the past 4 years, was adjudged of unsound mind by the county court last Saturday and was sent to the state hospital at Fulton. Stem had developed into a firebug and on numerous occasions had sought to set fire to the buildings of the county farm. Incidentally, Stem died at the state hospital, but was buried at the poor farm in January of 1942. The county maintained a pauper cemetery on the farm for the burial of residents, paupers from the county, and unclaimed bodies, such as Bert Urban, killed by a train in 1925, Alex Miles from Kansas City, who drowned in 1932, and John Bone, killed by a hit-and-run driver in 1943. Burials still occurred there in the 1940s. In February of 1949, Everett Copta, having decided to move on to other pursuits, the county employed Max Lloyd as superintendent of the county farm at a regular fixed salary, which appears to have been $131 per month. By 1950, his monthly salary was raised to $135. In February of 1951, there is still clear evidence that the farm was truly an operating farm, according to expenses paid by the county for farm operations. However, on August 1st, 1951, the county court minutes revealed the beginning of the end of the county poor farm. On that date, the county terminated the 1949 contract with Max Lloyd and entered into a new contract whereby Lloyd leased the farm owned by Gasconade County, and all indigent persons not qualifying for old age assistance and who had been inmates of the farm previously operated as a county poor farm would receive aid from the county at the rate of $50 per month. According to the terms of the lease, Lloyd was to pay the county $17 per month for the one-year term of the lease, at which time he was to deliver possession back to the county in its good condition as on the date of the lease. Further, Lloyd was not allowed to sublet any part of the property and agreed, among other things, to operate a general rooming and boarding house and nursing home in accordance with standards, rules, and regulations prescribed by the Department of Public Health and Welfare of the state of Missouri. It was a new era in the care of indigents. The farm was no longer the county poor farm. Now it was Frame Valley Rest Home, and payments by the county for aid for poor persons were now made to Frame Valley Rest Home, much as they had been paid to individuals prior to development of the poor farm. On October 28, 1954, the poor farm property was sold to Max Lloyd and Hilda Lloyd and Robert Lloyd for $7,500, the exact same dollar amount for which the county had purchased the 185 acres in 1909. On November 26, 1954, the Advertiser-Courier wrote a final story on a piece of Gasconade County history in a story titled, "Poorhouse Passes from Existence with Sale of Gasconade County Farm." The final vestige of the county farm, once commonly known as the poor farm, has passed from existence in Gasconade County. Operation of the institution was relinquished in 1951 when the county court leased the farm to Max Lloyd, and the final separation has come with the sale of the 180-acre tract and residence to Mr. Lloyd at $7,500. Mr. Lloyd has conducted the Frame Valley Nursing Home on the premises since leasing it in 1951 and has cared for the county's patients. A provision of the sale stated all county patients are to be kept and provided for at the home. In most counties of Missouri, county homes had become outmoded, and patients were transferred to nursing homes after the poorhouses were sold. The policy resulted in substantial savings to taxpayers in the counties affected. The history of the Gasconade County farm dates back to 1909 when the county court, composed of Judge D.F. Stoner, Frank Humpman, and Johnny Bryan, and county clerk Theodore Groff, all now deceased, purchased the building and acreage from Peter Daniser. And that is the end of the Gasconade County poor farm story. But I have to add a few additions at the end, things that have evolved at the Archives and Records Center related to the kind of research that our Gasconade County Historical Society does. It was sometime before 2011, a Dr. Well came to the archives, contacted the archives, wanting information about the Dr. Well, who was the first poor farm physician. This was that doctor's grandson. I believe he lived in Kansas, if I remember correctly, and of course we were able to provide him with information from the minutes and so on. Then, sometime also in 2011, a descendant of one of the residents who was age 79 in 1920 visited the archives. She knew about his having lived at the poor farm and having been buried there, but she had no idea why he lived at the poor farm. And then finally, remember I mentioned that a baby was born at the poor farm, a little girl. Well, I remember that little girl as a woman and as a mother of a number of children living in the Herman area. She and her husband lived in the Herman area. And in November of 2010, a woman from Dubuque, Iowa, contacted the Archives and Records Center wanting information about the poor farm, as she had found a female relative who died at the farm on June 10, 1944. To make a long story short, that female relative was the grandmother of the girl baby born at the farm that I mentioned earlier. While the little girl, the widowed mother of several children herself, had died earlier in 2010, we were able to connect the woman from Dubuque, Iowa, with the children of that baby girl. And to improve on the record, the contact from Dubuque allowed us to identify After further documentation, one of the unknown, unmarked burials at the poor farm. And since that time, since this talk, and our volunteers and so on at the archives know that I'm interested, and we all are interested in the poor farm. Anytime they ran across something in the newspapers reporting the death of someone who was buried at the poor farm, they shared that information with me. Believe it or not, there are 70 plus people buried at the poor farm that we have been able to document. When we started, I think we only had between 30 and 40, if I remember correctly. And now we know the names and dates of death of at least 70 people who are buried there. And I'll tell you, it could be an interesting story for another time. Because there are many interesting stories, as you can imagine, coming out of the poor farm. I do want to mention that on page 86 in our pictorial directory, there is a photo of the poor farm, which many of you have probably seen, and that photo dates from around 1930. Now, I do also want to add that when I gave the talk back in 2011, it was about twice this long, so consider yourself lucky.
You didn't mention the location. You didn't mention the location of the farm, but I'm assuming after you described it, it's the one next to Black Forest, correct?
Yes, it is next to Black Forest. Kathy Lloyd Henson owns it. It sits very close to the highway. It's been totally rehabbed with new stone put around the outside. But yes, that is the location. And at that time, of course, it was the iron. That was the iron road. Highway 19 was not where Highway 19 is now. So that was on the iron road coming in from Swiss into town.
I have a question. How did they determine who went to the poor farm? If they didn't have any relatives to send them, did somebody at the county just say, I know a neighbor that needs to go, or how did they determine that?
It was kind of that way, by word of mouth. They were made aware of persons who were destitute, and sometimes a family member would step forward. They knew the county was going to pay for their care, but there was no system like we have now, although, I think there are a lot of cracks in the system now, but it was, there were not extensive forms to fill out and all kinds of information to be provided. People knew, you knew the people around you and knew if they had nothing or had no one to care for them.
Why was it that the Pruta family was living in the poor farm?
Why was it?
The Pruta family, because they ended up, one of the Prutas, the mother or whatever, ended up buying or owning a lot of acreage in that area, including Black Forest.
How do I start that story? The Pukta farm, the original Pukta farm was on the Crane Creek Road, where the winery is now, and the property north of it. Okay, that was the Pukta farm. When Mr. Pukta, whenever he decided to finish, that he was done working at the poor farm, they moved over to the winery farm. It was later, the next generation, Randy, who purchased the Black Forest property. But they never owned the poor farm property.
Are the graves marked? And is there a fence around it, or is it?
I haven't been there recently. Back probably about probably about 1994, the Senior Girl Scout troop interment cleaned up the cemetery. They fenced it. Put a sign with the known burials at that time. But, as I said, I have not been out there, and so I don't know that it's being taken care of at all. I keep thinking that would be a good project for the Historical Society, since it's a county farm. And just, and again, as I said, that there could be a whole story about the people who were buried there. Someone might be killed on the railroad at Herman, and I can think of one instance, I can't recall the name, where this identification that was on the person who was killed indicated that he was from Illinois. Well, I guess the county attempted to contact the people in Illinois, but they had no means. They did not have the resources to be able to have his body brought back. So he was buried at the poor farm. Or a body would come floating down the river. Yeah, you know, nobody knew who it was, they had no identification on them, they were buried at the Poor Farm. Other questions?
Thank you all.